Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video.
Okay, so last week we finished with, we went through costs, the fees, the allocation of the cost, who pays for what. We got through all the way to private transfer fees, any of the costs or fees that you could put in, transaction coordinator fees, things of that nature, and then the other terms and conditions. That's what we got through last week. So I'm going to share my screen. We are going to start there again. Okay, so you guys should be looking at right now the page 3 of 16 of the RPA, and where it says there, paragraph 3R, other terms. All right, we talked about it a little bit. Someone, I think last week, asked about how can I put the transaction coordinator fee in other terms, and I said no, it's dependent on what is in here in Q16 and 17. So we talked about that, right? Termite costs should go in there. Anything that you're asking the seller to pay for specifically, and the TC fee for the buyer if the buyer's going to pay for it. If you didn't have space here, let's say that there was two things that you're asking for to get paid that aren't norms, then the transaction coordinator fee would go here, or the termite, if you're asking for it, the termite completion and repairs, that would go in other terms. This is where you disclose things like you're related to the buyer, or related to, or you're the buyer, or you're one of the buyers, or you're a partner in an entity that is buying it, and you're the agent, and you're licensed, all that stuff. That's where that would go in other terms. If it was an offer that was subject to interior inspection, the subject to interior inspection would go in there in other terms. Speaking of subject to interior inspection, I kind of want to clarify. When you guys write an offer subject to interior inspection, or as a listing agent, when you get an offer that says subject to interior inspection, before they do their interior inspection, you accept that offer, right? So it's not like, hey, I got an offer that's subject to interior inspection. Let's tell them, okay, you can come in and inspect it on this date, and then we'll present your offer. That's not what subject to interior inspection means. What subject to interior inspection means is I'm going to present this offer. We're going to decide to counter and accept this offer based on the offer as it is now, that you haven't seen it. And then at some point after acceptance, you're going to go in, see the property, and then you're going to make a choice. Do you want to continue with the sale? So remember that when you get subject to interior inspection offers, you're supposed to present it like everything else. You're not supposed to get it, then say, okay, go look at it, then I'll present it. It's not how it works, okay? And subject to interior inspection offers are actually the way that you would write an offer on a property that is coming soon. So, for example, we know that the 3 MLS statuses are, right, registered, which means no marketing, no sign, no cold calling, no open houses, no nothing. Then there's coming soon, which is sign, market, do everything you would as it was active, except for showings, right? No open houses, no showings. And then active, showings, open houses, the whole bit. During a coming soon, I can't show the property. It doesn't matter if it's my buyer. It doesn't matter if it's, somebody the seller introduces me to. Another agent calls me because they see the sign because it's coming soon, and my buyer has to see it. I cannot show it while it's coming soon. What I can do is present offers subject to interior inspection. So if I have a coming soon property and an agent calls me, or one of my buyers that I've been working with, I know that, hey, this is probably a good house for you. I can write an offer to the seller subject to interior inspection. I can accept it, counter it, accept it, the whole thing. And then the buyer goes in and can see it because an offer's been submitted. The offer's been submitted, it's been accepted, we're following the rules. Then the buyer can see the coming soon property. And guess what? During this whole time, while it's subject to interior inspection and I accept an offer, even if it's, it's within that coming soon period, as long as the coming soon period hasn't expired, that property can stay coming soon because I'm not marketing it. I'm not showing it. I'm accepting an offer subject to, and then letting the buyer see it because they've submitted an offer. And if they don't like it and that deal cancels, guess what? I still haven't shown it because I had an offer. I can leave it as coming soon. Okay? So subject to interior inspection. That's what that means, and that's what it's for. So when you get, when you have a listing that is subject to and all your offers come in subject to, it's not, okay, here's the date, go see it, and then we'll present your offer. No, tell people, you have appointments only, and this is going to be the only appointment where we're going to show. Everybody who sees it writes an offer, and then you can submit it. If you're going to do subject to, you accept the offer, and then you schedule their visual inspection after that. You set a time limit on your counters, right? Buyer has to do their visual inspection of the property, their interior inspection of the property within 5 days of acceptance. Here's the date you're going to do it, right? Or to do it by X date, or we're going to set an appointment because there's a tenant or whatever the case is. You set the time. If they don't perform by that time, you can send them a notice to perform. You can cancel the deal. If they go and see the property and they don't like it, they can cancel. They can walk away, and then you move on to the next offer. Okay, but just to clarify what subject to interior inspection means, because I think there's a big misconception about it. I've talked to so many agents that are like, yeah, I got an offer subject to interior inspection. We scheduled their inspection for this date, and then we're going to present offers. That's not how it works. Okay. Any questions before I move on to paragraph 4? So the first 3 pages of this offer were all paragraph 3. We're going to move on to paragraph 4 next. Any questions before I do that?
Can you please touch again about the coming soon? So should we accept it if it is offer is good, and
Sure.
and then but then anyone else that sends an offer, or can we say we're not accepting until we show the property, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's up to you. You could say, okay, we're coming soon, and I get blind offers that are subject to interior inspection.
Right.
You have a choice. You could say, you could respond to all of those offers that you get on the coming soon and say, I'm sorry, until we market it on this date, they're not ready to even look at offers, so we're not. And you don't have to, because it's coming soon. If you choose to, you can start negotiating those offers.
Thank you.
Excuse me. So yeah, you don't have to. So again, remember, registered is no marketing. Coming soon, marketing, no showing. Active is I can do everything. Open houses, showings, marketing, the whole bit. Now, any listing I take, I have 2 business days to get that listing to be registered, coming soon, or active. If I don't put it as one of those, registered, coming soon, or active, it is a violation.
Do we need picture for the register?
No. Registered, you need nothing but the address and the list price. That's it. And then when you register it, once you want to take it to active, then you take that registered listing, because it's going to give you a listing ID, and you make that one active or coming soon or whatever you're, pending because you sold it. Because registered listings, I can show to my buyers that have signed an agency disclosure with me or with the brokerage. I can't market it, right? I can't go door knock it, can't hold an open house, I can't put up a sign, can't cold call around it, but I can tell all the agents here in this under this brokerage umbrella, hey, I have this listing that's registered. If you guys have a buyer for it and you have a buyer that's already signed an agent disclosure, we can go show it to them. Within the last year, if they've signed an agency disclosure, we can go show them that registered listing. And if they want to buy it, they can buy it. I can open escrow. I can accept the offer. I can do all that stuff. And then I just change it from registered to active to pending when I accept an offer. So it's just, again, this is a whole thing, and I know it's off of contract class, but it's just, I wanted to touch on that because I get so many questions about that stuff. We do. As a management team, we get so many questions about the statuses in the MLS, and then I always see this issue with subject to interior inspection offers. Okay? All right, so let's move on. Paragraph 4. These are all of the addenda, advisories that get attached to the offer. So anything that we check a box for to get attached, if we do it earlier, right? Like we could go back to the TOPA here, right? Like this one, the occupied units by tenants. If we check the box here for the TOPA, guess what will happen? In paragraph 4 down here, the TOPA is going to be checked off. But anything that we need that needs to be added, right? A probate agreement purchase addendum, the manufactured home purchase agreement addendum. These boxes will be checked because we check them at the very beginning, and I'll go all the way back to the top. But when this is a probate, right? Where is that? Oh, you know what? I guess we have to just check it off there on the bottom. So if this is a probate or a manufactured home, you have to check that you're adding the manufactured home addendum, the property agreement purchase, probate agreement purchase addendum. You have to add those into the purchase agreement. Anytime I check these boxes, they're going to be automatically added into my transaction and zip forms. So check the boxes of the things that you want to use. Okay. Addendums. Remember, addendums are only for space. They're not for negotiating. I like to drive that point home every time we talk about it, because I have conversations with agents. I see stuff that we have negotiations with outside agents, and outside agents are, doing credits and extensions of times and all kinds of things on addendums. It will work. It will be, binding, but it is not the proper form. Addendums are for space. I run out of space in a line. I need to make a bigger explanation in the TDS. I need more room here in the purchase agreement on the other terms and conditions. That's what addendums are for. Okay? That's what addendums are for. And every time I write an addendum, right? If I have an addendum to the RPA, that's addendum number 1 to the RPA. The next time we write an addendum to the RPA, it's number 2, number 3, number 4. Now, I also now have to do an addendum to, let's say, the request for repairs. If I have an addendum number 1 for the RPA, that addendum to the request for repairs is not addendum number 2, because it's not to the RPA, it's to the request for repairs. That's addendum number 1 to the request for repairs. So you got to keep your numbers straight. And the reason you have to keep your numbers straight is because if you're using this wrong form, number 1 for negotiating, and it has things in there like price changes and credits and things like that, it has to go to the lender. And when the lender sees addendum 1 and then addendum 3 and then an addendum 5, they're going to say, okay, well, where's number 2 and number 4? And then when you get number 2 and number 4, it's an addendum to a completely different document. It screws up the entire transaction. So again, addendums are for space, period, end of story. Amendments of existing agreement terms are for changing already accepted offers, right? I'm already in transaction. We've fully executed a contract. We've agreed. We've begun the transaction. Now we need to change things like time periods, to credits, right? Those kind of things. Go on an addendum of existing agreement terms. And changing buyers do not go on either one of those forms. They don't go on addendums. If I need to add or remove a buyer, or I need to assign it to a completely different buyer, they don't go on addendums or amendments of existing agreement terms. They go on assignment of agreement addendums, separate form. So you guys, when forms exist, they exist for a reason. And we need to start getting into the habit of using the correct form at the correct time. When we need to do something, that's what we use the form that is allocated to do that thing. They need to add these when the offer is done, not when the offer has been accepted, like the solar panels. Okay, so, there are certain things that need to go with the offer, but when the offer is accepted, you can still sign any of these amendments or addenda. They can be incorporated in. It just doesn't have to be incorporated. So you can't just say blanketly, no, you have to do this at the beginning or you can't do it. That's not the case. Any of these forms, any of these addenda, any of these amendments, any of these advisories, if they weren't sent in with the original offer, they can be incorporated later as long as all the other parties agree. But for example, if there was, I'm trying to think of what could be a backup offer addendum. If I don't counter and add a backup offer addendum that has the terms of the backup offer, and then the buyer tries to send it to me because I tell them they're a backup offer, I'm not required to sign it, right? Because they could ask, but I don't have to. It's just that when we incorporate things with the purchase agreement, unless they're countered out, they're automatically included. Anytime we add it after the purchase agreement is signed, it just becomes a negotiation and it doesn't have to be included, okay? So addendums, space, that's it, okay? Just it, space. Backup offer addendum, like I just talked about, that's for when you're a backup offer. When you tell a buyer as listing agent, hey, you are going to be backup offer number one, I'm going to keep you as a backup offer, what you're supposed to do, the proper procedure is I counter your offer as if I was accepting it, right? The same way I countered the offer I accepted, I'm going to counter you that way too. The terms that I want and I think are fair for my seller, I'm going to counter that. I'm going to add one different thing to your counter than I did to any of the other counters, which is you are backup offer, buyer to be aware they're backup offer number one, backup offer addendum included, please sign and return with this counter offer. And now the backup offer addendum is going to state terms of how long is there basically there, do they have to wait as a backup offer, right? There's a time period. It says, hey, look, you have in 17 days, if I don't cancel and accept your offer as backup, then, this one's canceled automatically. It has terms on, are we putting a deposit in? Are we waiting until they're accepted and then putting the deposit in? There's all kinds of stuff in that one. But that's what makes you a real backup offer. Anytime somebody says, oh yeah, I'm going to keep you as a backup, they don't even remember who they have as backups. Sometimes they do, most of the time they don't, and they just put it back on the market and accept another offer. Okay? But if you're going to be a listing agent and you legitimately want to have a backup offer, this is the right way to do it. Now, the septic well, property monument, and propane addendum, if you are writing an offer on a place that has a septic, or you believe has a septic tank or has a well for whatever reason, you need to incorporate this into your offer, because after the fact, trying to negotiate it is a nightmare. Okay? So you need to make sure that that's put in. The buyer's intent to exchange addendum and the seller's intent to exchange addendum, those should be incorporated at the beginning. When I'm a buyer and I'm writing an offer that I'm exchanging out of a property into the property I'm writing an offer on, I need to include my buyer's intent to exchange addendum. It's like a soft contingency, basically, right? It's not a contingency of sale, because that property doesn't technically have to sell before I can identify properties after the fact, things like that. But it's a softer contingency. It just gives us some terms of what we have to agree to as part of buying this replacement property for my 1031 tax deferred exchange. And if I'm a listing agent and I'm countering back to somebody that, hey, the seller has to do an exchange and I need you to cooperate with that exchange, I need to be incorporating this as seller's intent to exchange addendum in my counter offers. It has to be in there. Any other addenda that you may want to include, I don't know what else could there be, but if you wanted to, you check other and you type the name of those addenda in there. Okay. The buyer and seller advisories, the reason those boxes are checked is because they're automatically incorporated into this purchase agreement every time you pull one up. The buyer's investigation advisory, the wire fraud advisory, the fair housing discrimination advisory, and the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory are always attached. Okay. So those things are going to automatically be, then they're going to be checked. The wildfire disaster advisory, again, it's only necessary if you're into, or maybe in a place that has a wildfire danger or high fire hazard. That's, mountainous areas, things like that, high brush areas. The trust advisory needs to be incorporated when I'm writing a property that is a successor trustee selling the property. So if I'm writing an offer on a property that is the Kyle Estrada Trust, and the original trustee is not the seller, it is the successor trustee, I need to include the trust advisory into my offer. And the trust advisory, what it does is it just kind of explains what the entity seller is responsible for and what they're not required to provide, right? That they don't have to give you a TDS, that they don't have to give you an SPQ, that they're only required to provide the lead-based paint, the NHD, and an exempt seller's disclosure. And the same thing goes for the REO advisory, what they're required to provide to you and what they're not required to provide to you. That's what those are, okay, those advisories. Statewide buyer and seller advisory is one of the advisories that I'm okay with that you don't incorporate necessarily at the very beginning of your offer, because it's a lot of pages. You got a 16-page offer, and then I think the SBSA is another 15 pages. So if you're submitting your offer with that, right, you're submitting already 30-something plus pages just in CAR forms, right? So 40 with the other advisories and things. And then your proof of funds, your credit report, your pre-qual, all those things you're sending an offer that is 50, 60 pages. I'm okay with the SBSA being incorporated later in the transaction, okay? The short sale information advisory. that short sale, I skipped over the short sale addendum, didn't I, at the top? The short sale information advisory is just that. It's just an advisory saying, hey, listen, here's the things that happen in a short sale, and that's it. It doesn't change the terms of the agreement. It's just more of like, hey, we're letting you know, buyer and seller, that this is what could or couldn't happen during a short sale. Going back to the addenda, though, the short sale addendum, if you know you're writing an offer on a short sale, that needs to be incorporated. You need to check that box and have it incorporated. And the short sale addendum, what it does is it adds some timelines. It says there's the X amount of time for the bank to give us a full approval. And we don't have to put our deposit in or start removing our contingencies until after we get that approval from the bank. So that's very important on a short sale, that short sale advisory is incorporated into your purchase agreement. Court confirmation addendum is not necessary, especially if you've included the probate agreement, because it's already going to be taken care of there in the probate agreement. Okay. Probate advisory, just like the trust and the REO advisory, is just, again, what the seller's required to provide to the buyer and what they're not. So just so the buyer is aware of what they're going to receive or not receive. Okay.
Kai, I'm sorry, you went a little too fast on the probate.
No, sure.
Probate and the NOD. When they overlap, what goes first? Or
I'm sorry,
as
a
a
probate and
listing.
an NOD? What?
Yes. It's a notice of default, but it's on probate.
Okay. The listing agreement is the same listing agreement. The notice of default purchase agreement would be used if there was an investor purchasing the property and the seller was living in it. But now, since it's a probate, there's no seller living in it. So that wipes away the NOD purchase agreement. So it's regular purchase agreement with the probate advisory and the probate agreement purchase addendum. And if it's a short sale, then you would also include the short sale addendum in there.
Thank you.
Because it could be a notice of default without being a short sale. I mean, it didn't used to be the case, right? 2010, 11, those things are short sales. That 2008, the short sales that we were trying to fix from the previous market, those were NODs and they were short sales. They weren't able to cover there. Yes, Angel, go ahead.
If it's a bankruptcy sale, do we need to include the court confirmation addendum?
Yes, that would be the only
Bankruptcy.
time you would incorporate it, because a probate or a conservatorship, like a conservatorship or a probate, are usually handled with the probate agreement purchase addendum.
Right.
If it's just a bankruptcy sale that the court has to confirm, then yes, you would
Right.
incorporate that court confirmation addendum.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions about the advisories or addendums? No? Okay. Okay, so here now we're going to get into those explanation paragraphs that were referenced before. So, right, remember, this is all paragraph 3. Everything that we looked at in this chart here is paragraph 3 from the very beginning. See right here, terms of purchase and allocation of cost, paragraph 3. These paragraph numbers here are now going to give more detailed explanation of those terms of purchase. Okay, so we start with paragraph 5. Paragraph 5, here we go. 5A, the deposit. So now it's going to start talking about the terms. The initial deposit, buyer shall deliver deposit directly to escrow holder if a method other than wire transfer is specified in paragraph 3D1, which we went over, and such method is unacceptable to escrow holder, then upon notice from escrow holder, delivery shall be by wire transfer. So what they're saying there basically is, look, we could agree when we accept your offer that you're going to put a personal check as your deposit. Well, if for some reason when we accept everything and we get to escrow and we give them a copy of the offer and escrow sees that it's a personal check and escrow says, I'm sorry, we won't accept personal checks, then it automatically reverts back to wire transfer. Okay, that's what paragraph 3A is saying right there. Sylvia, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted.
No.
Okay, well, let's mute you then. So that's 3A. By default, if you write a method of initial deposit that escrow is not okay with, it automatically reverts to wire transfer. That's why my usually my advice and the direction I push you guys in is always just leave it as default. It's going to be a wire transfer. It's just cleaner and it's easier. Okay. Increased deposit. Increased deposit specified in paragraph 3D2 is to be delivered to escrow holder in the same manner as the initial deposit. So if I say I'm giving you a $5,000 initial deposit, right, within 3 business days of opening escrow or of accepting the offer, and 14 days later I'm going to give you an additional $5,000 in an increased deposit because I'm getting the money from somewhere else, it also has to go in exactly the way we agreed for the initial deposit. So if I did a wire transfer for the initial deposit, I can't do a cashier's check for the increased deposit. It also has to be a wire transfer, and vice versa. If we agreed on a cashier's check, then that's how the initial deposit has to go in. Okay, so just so you guys know. If the parties agree to liquidated damages in this agreement, they also agree to incorporate the increased deposit into the liquidated damage amount by signing a new liquidated damages clause on the CAR form DID. It's just like it's a receipt for those funds going in. You put them in, you sign that, and now whatever that money was in the increased deposit becomes part of liquidated damages, just like your initial deposit does. Okay. Retention of deposit. Paragraph 29, if initialed by all parties or otherwise incorporated in this agreement, specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clause specifying a remedy, such as release or forfeiture of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the Civil Code, and regarding possible liability and remedies if buyer fails to deliver the deposit. So just because someone says, oh, deposit is non-refundable, doesn't mean it is. There's very specific terms on what has to happen in order for a buyer to be able to lose their deposit if they default on the contract, if they breach the contract. So you can't just say by default it's, hey, your deposit is non-refundable. Doesn't work like that. If it violates that civil code on the steps that have to happen for the seller to retain the buyer's deposit, it's unenforceable. So guess what, guys? As listing agents, it doesn't matter if the buyer writes deposit is non-refundable. You can't in a counter say buyer's deposit is non-refundable upon acceptance. Just live within the terms of the contract, which is when the buyer removes all their contingencies, they have now basically forfeited their deposit, right, or put their deposit in jeopardy. And if they breach the contract or default on the contract, then you have the right to request their deposit. That's how it works. And we need to be smarter about how we do things, because what happens is the conversations we have with our sellers are us telling them like, hey, look what I did. I made their deposit non-refundable. And our sellers then assume that means that if this deal cancels, they're getting that money no matter what. And when they don't, they blame you, listing agent, because you promised them that this was non-refundable. So guess what, guys? Don't try to change things. Don't try to make this super hard to get out of. That's not our job. Our job is to sell the house, not collect deposits. Our job is to sell the house, not collect deposits. So if you want to put that verbiage in, you're just trying to collect deposits. Follow the terms of the contract. Make sure you stay on top of the buyers, that they're following the timelines. And if they do breach the contract, you will have the right to request their deposit. Are you going to get it 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But you'll be able to request it. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Don't try to make the contract harder than it already is. Just sell the house. All cash offer. If an all cash offer is specified in 3A, no loan is needed to purchase the property. This agreement is not contingent on a buyer obtaining a loan. Buyer shall, within the time specified in 3H1, deliver written verification of funds sufficient to the purchase price and closing costs. And we talked about it when we went over 3H1, and that is with the offer. They have to submit that stuff. First loan. This loan will provide for conventional financing unless FHA, VA, or seller financing or other is checked in paragraph 3E. So the default in the contract means the way the contract comes is it's going to be conventional financing unless you check something different. Additional finance amount. If an additional finance amount is specified in paragraph 3E2, that was the second loan that we talked about when we talked about that paragraph, that amount will provide for conventional financing unless seller financing or other is checked. Buyer's loan status. Buyer authorizes seller and seller's authorized agent to contact buyer's lender to determine the status of any buyer's loan specified in paragraph 3E, or any alternate loan buyer pursues, whether or not a contingency of this agreement. If the contact information for the buyer's lender is different from that provided under the terms of paragraph 6B, buyer shall deliver the updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. So, buyer's agents, you don't have the right to say to seller, no, you can't talk to my lender. The contract by default says they have to have the contact information for the lender, and it doesn't say listing agent. It says seller or seller's agent can contact that lender to get information. So you got to tell your lenders, hey, be prepared because I got to give contact information to the listing agent. Now, does anybody really do this on a regular basis? Nah, probably not. And the reason that that doesn't happen, it's not requested more from listing agents, is because you guys don't read the contract and have no idea that it says that in it. So just keep in mind, I'm not saying by just start now, hey, here's all everybody's contact information. I'm just saying you can't fight them if they ask for it. If they say, hey, listen, we need it, you got 1 day to provide it. And if you don't, they can send you a notice to perform, and then they could cancel on you because there's a timeline in here, which means they can use a notice to perform in regards to that term. Okay, so keep in mind. If FHA or VA is checked in paragraph 3E, the FHA VA mandatory clause shall be incorporated and signed by all parties. Buyer shall, within the time specified in 3E1, deliver to seller written notice from request for repairs or AEE, amendment of existing agreement terms, of any lender requirements that buyer requests seller to pay for otherwise correct, or that there are no lender requirements. Notwithstanding seller's agreement, that buyer may obtain FHA or VA financing. Seller has no obligation to pay or satisfy any or all lender requirements unless agreed in writing. So basically what that is like, hey, you've got to tell me in that 17 days of the loan contingency period and investigation period, right, because they match, you got to either send me a request for repairs or an AEA saying, here is what the lender requires of you to repair, or the lender requires to be repaired. We're requesting that you do it. That's fine. The buyer can request anything they want. The seller has no obligation to do those repairs. None. Zero. Nothing requires the seller to do the repairs. Okay, so keep in mind, when you guys are writing offers as FHA buyers and your assumption is that the seller will take care of the repairs, they are not required to. So you've got to be prepared even as a buyer, like, hey, either this deal's going to fall apart or we're going to pay for the repairs to get done. Now, most of the time the seller will ultimately end up paying for it, because if it's an FHA buyer, you know, you're going to have other FHA buyers. If this deal falls apart, that appraisal is going to stick with the property for the next 6 months. So you're now really eliminating any other FHA buyers if you're not willing to do those repairs. And, you know, it makes it more difficult to get the house resold. So a lot of times they'll do it. And that's a conversation you'll have with your seller as the listing agent. Joseph, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, as the listing agent, can you, or do, I don't know what you think about this, but like, you know, say you're getting multiple offers and you want to communicate with the seller, be like, if everything looks good, are you like, kind of what I'm trying to say is like, communicate with the buyer that they're not going to request for repairs. Can you do that verbally or?
Okay, so, well, verbally, I mean, you can have any conversation you want verbally, basically. But I think what you're trying to say is, can you basically state to the buyer, seller's not doing any repairs?
Oh, that too.
Or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that actually makes it more like, you know, so they don't have it in their head.
Here's the thing. Again, this goes back to the relationship with your seller, that you say things to your seller like, I'm going to tell them you're not going to do any repairs, right? And so what that seller hears is, oh, great, I'm not going to have to do any repairs, and they can't even request repairs. And that's not true. So it doesn't matter if I say seller's not doing repairs, because the contract already says that. So the buyer still has the right, even if I tell you in writing, seller won't do any repairs, buyer to be responsible for all repairs, all those things, they can still request it. And then what happens is, I've told my seller, hey, I'm going to tell them this, like we're not doing anything, they have to do it. And when the request comes in, then the seller starts looking at you like, well, why did we even bother with that nonsense at the beginning? So my suggestion for you guys is leave it alone. Now, you could state in there at the beginning, hey, listen, any lender required repairs that come up through the transaction, the seller will not do those. Buyer to be responsible for them. Now, can the buyer still request it? Yes. But they've already agreed that they're going to pay for those repairs that are required from the lender. So then it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to walk away. So I would be more in that vein of like, look, I know you guys can request whatever repairs you want, but lender required repairs are going to be the responsibility of the buyer, plain and simple. And then if the buyer walks, the buyer walks. Okay. All right. Balance of purchase price, that's your down payment, including the cash funds. Deposit with escrow holder pursuant to the escrow holder instructions. It's going to come later after the acceptance. The limits on credits to buyer. This is something that we talked about with an agent this week because people were requesting large credits and all kinds of stuff. Any credit to buyer as specified in paragraph 3G1 or otherwise agreed from any source for closing or other costs that is agreed to by the parties shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender and made at close of escrow. If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit. And in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustment to the purchase price to make up for the difference between the contractual credit and the lender allowable credit. So let's explain that. A lot of times when we request credits as buyer's agents, we increase our sales price to allow for that credit. So house is listed for $600. We write an offer for $625. We ask, or for $615. We ask for $15,000 in credit, and the seller says, "Yeah, I wanted $6. I'm getting $615, so we'll credit you back that money, the $15,000." Perfect. The lender allowable credit turns out to be $7,000. So I have a difference now of $8,000 of credits. So now I have a $7,000 credit, but I'm still paying $615 for the property. That credit that we agreed to, the $15,000, gets automatically reduced down to the $7,000 because that's what the lender is going to allow. But the sales price doesn't change unless we make the request to change it. So you guys have to think about that part of it is, okay, I'm writing this offer over to get this amount of credit. If the lender disallows any of that credit, I've at least got to make a request to the seller to reduce the sales price. Now, the bad thing is seller doesn't have to agree, right? So let's say that we offered $615, we asked for $15,000 credit, we only get $7,000, so that gets reduced, and then we go back to the seller and say, hey, listen, we want to reduce the sales price to $607 instead of $615 because of the amount of the credit, and he says, nah, it's not my problem. I agreed to give you the credit. Your lender's the problem, not me. I'm not lowering the price. It could happen. And then you have to make a choice. Well, are we going to continue on with the purchase? Do we have to continue on with the purchase because of any of the, because we've removed contingencies or things? You have to make a choice at that point. But as buyer's agent, we have to at least make the request to reduce the price to show that we're working on our buyer's behalf because we know that that price only existed to give us enough room for that credit. So please, 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 please keep in mind when you're doing credits that there's an allowable amount that the lender's going to get to. And I know that, by, I don't know what it is now, but like FHA, 4% is the maximum. Well, that's great. You could ask for 4% in closing costs, but if your buyer doesn't need 4% in closing costs, they're not going to get it, right? You're only going to get the amount that's necessary. And just because the maximum amount is one thing doesn't mean that the underwriter is going to allow that amount. So you guys have to keep that in mind, okay? Please. Questions on credits before I move on?
Just to reconfirm, just speak with your lender if you're going to request credits so that you know what the max is so you don't get in that position in the first place, correct?
Yes. And really, if you're going to talk about credits, get the exact amount that your buyer needs, not just a blank amount, like a blanket amount. Like your buyer usually has some money or the lender's helping out or you're helping out with credits. Know exactly what the amount is that's necessary because, again, it helps strengthen your offer, okay? Additional financing terms, moving on. Verification of down payment and closing costs. Written verification of buyer's down payment and closing costs within the time specified in 3H2. That's by default is with the offer. May be made by buyer or buyer's lender or loan broker pursuant to paragraph 6B, which is the next paragraph. Verification of loan applications. Buyer shall deliver to seller within the time specified in 3H3, which is by default with the offer. A letter from buyer's lender or loan broker stating that based on a review of buyer's written application and credit report, buyer's pre-qualified or pre-approved for any new loan specified in paragraph 3E. If any loan specified in paragraph 3E is an adjustable rate loan, the pre-qualification or pre-approval letter shall be based on the qualifying rate, not the initial loan rate. So what that means is they have to qualify on what it's going to adjust to if it's an adjustable loan. Okay? Buyer's stated financing. This is important. Seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including but not limited to, as applicable, all cash, the amount of down payment, contingent or non-contingent loan. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell to buyer in reliance on buyer's specified financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in the agreement, but shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow date, even if based upon alternate financing. Buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close escrow as specified in this agreement. So basically what it's saying is, look, if you want to change financing without my permission, you start doing this on the side, and you can close without me having to do anything, then I can't stop you. But if you switch financing, if you write an offer and say it's conventional, or you write an offer and say it's a specific down payment, right? And you switch it, and then you can't qualify on that financing that you switched to, your loan contingency no longer protects you. You're still required to close escrow. So you need to get back to that original financing and try to close. If not, your loan contingency does not protect you. Okay. Now, I don't have to sign anything. If you give me an amendment of existing agreement terms and say, oh, we're, buyer and seller agree, buyer is switching, financing from X to Y, I don't have to sign to accept that. And then if you can't qualify for that new loan, your loan contingency doesn't protect you. So just keep in mind that, lying to get your offer accepted is not the best course of action. Okay. Closing and occupancy. If buyer intends to occupy his primary secondary residence, paragraph 3E3, there's that little box where you check that it's, primary, secondary, or investment. Unless otherwise agreed, such as in the CAR form TOPA, the unit buyer intends to occupy shall be vacant at the time possession is delivered to buyer. And if the property contains more than one unit, within 3 days after acceptance, buyer shall give seller written notice of which unit buyer intends to occupy. Occupancy may impact available financing. Seller shall disclose to buyer if occupied by tenants or persons other than the seller, and attach the form CAR form TOPA in a counteroffer if not part of buyer's offer. Okay, so again, that's just talking about if there's tenants, you have to disclose the tenants that are in there. You have to put a TOPA into the offer. If the buyer didn't do it, you have to do it as listing agent. Okay. How would you handle if you're representing both of them? And what question is that for, Melissa? You can unmute so you can ask the question.
That was about when we were talking about requests for repairs and buying as is. Like, how would you navigate those situations if you agreed to purchase as is, but you're representing both?
Every offer is as is, and that's actually the next paragraph we're going to get to. Your job as the listing agent, when you're representing both, is you tell the seller you're not required to make any repairs. The property is being sold as is based on your disclosures and the investigations done by the buyer. And if they request any repairs, you have no obligation. You can reject them. That's the conversation that needs to happen with the seller. Not that, hey, it's as is, and they're not. No matter what condition you tell them, they have the right to request repairs. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, if your seller's adamant, like, no, they can't do repairs, then you got to tell them, I'm sorry, they have the right to request. And then you go to your buyer if you're representing both and you say, hey, listen, he's adamant that he's not going to do any repairs. But if you want to request, you have the right to. It's just not going to happen, and it's just going to make him angry, but it's up to you. I'll do whatever you want to do. You submit them. You guys have to know that you're responsible because you did. And you tell the seller, the buyers the same thing. You knew when we gave you the offer, because I'm representing both sides, that he told you as is. If you want to request, that's fine, but I don't think you should because you knew what the terms of were of the agreement. Because you've already put yourself in that position of there being an as is in your counteroffer. You just don't do that. Okay? Now, if I'm dealing with a seller, and we'll talk about this as is stuff, if I'm talking to a seller and my seller is adamant I'm not going to do any repairs, the one thing I am going to stress heavily that he do is, or they do as seller, is anything that is a health, safety, or code violation, because you're putting yourself in a really precarious position after the close, right? You knew there was a health, they made the request for repairs. You forced them to buy the property and the condition was in. And if there's any health, safety, or code violations, I always tell the seller, that's stuff you pay for, period. End of story, repair it. Don't give credits. Don't do any. You get somebody to fix it and you fix it properly because I don't want to deal with those problems after the fact. But your job as listing agent is to tell the seller, I understand you don't want to do repairs and you have every right not to do those, but they also have every right to request them. And that's how it's going to happen when we get offers accepted. Do you have any other questions? Right? I mean, that's how it needs to be handled with repairs. But again, as agents, a lot of times we're super afraid of our clients. So we're afraid that if we tell them that no matter what, the buyer gets to request repairs, that they're going to be mad and not want to sell their house. Sorry, but every buyer that comes through, every agent that does it, every contract that they sign is all going to say the exact same thing. So guess what? Stand up to your sellers. Your job, you were hired by them to protect their interests, and that's what you're doing. That's it, plain and simple. Okay? Let's look at the condition of the property on closing. Unless otherwise agreed, the property shall be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including pool, spa, landscaping, and grounds, is to be maintained in substantially the same condition as on the date of acceptance, and all debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time possession is delivered to buyer, if not on the same date. If items are not removed when possession is delivered to the buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer, after first delivering to seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of and may bring legal action as per the agreement to receive reasonable costs from the seller. So again, talk to your sellers. You got to clear this thing out. Just because it's not my house anymore, I'm done with it. You still could have some liability as far as a financial obligation to pay them back for any cost of getting rid of your debris that's left behind. And if a seller leaves personal items behind that they didn't want to throw away, like it was a mistake, and the buyer tells them, hey, your stuff is here, and they don't go pick it up, the buyer has every right to throw it out no matter what the value of it is. Okay? It's not theirs anymore. Buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property in order to determine its present condition. Seller and agents may not be aware of all defects affecting the property or other factors that buyer considers important. Property improvements may not be built according to code in compliance with current law or have had all required permits issued and or finalized. So there it is in bold print, buyer. We can't just rely on the disclosures because not all, sellers might just not remember stuff to disclose. It's not malicious, like, oh, they're hiding something from me. They just don't remember or they don't know that there's an issue. So it's our job to do a very thorough home inspection, professional home inspection, which means vetting the professional home inspector that you use, right? Don't just use any guy off the street. Figure out who figure out that you're working with the most professional home inspector that you can. Go to the city, look up all the permits, right? Your buyer needs to do that, not you, buyer's agent. You could go with them, but it shouldn't be you being the only person at the city collecting the permits and sharing them with the buyer, because if there's something wrong, if a permit was missed, if the city didn't give you something or gave you something wrong and you say, no, everything's cool, all the permits are there, and something turns out to be not permitted, guess who now becomes liable? You do, buyer's agent. So go with your buyers. Coach your buyers, stand next to your buyers, have your buyers talk to the city, and the question they ask is, hello, I need to see all permits for 123 Banana Street. Please give me all the permits. Not let me see permits for master bedroom. Let me see permits for the addition. Let me see permits for the enclosed patio. Don't ask for specific things, because if those specific things aren't permitted, you could now cause the city to go out and do an inspection of the property, and the contract says I can't do that unless there is a law that requires the city to come out and inspect the property, like Compton, Southgate, Linwood, Huntington Park, those areas. Okay, so go with your, it's telling you, please go review permits. Hire any inspectors you want to do inspections. Know what you're buying, because this property is being sold to you as is, per the disclosures that come from the seller and any investigations that you do. Okay, so guys, just know, as listing agent, that nonsense of putting as is in your counter offers, it's a waste of time, because it's already right here. It's already in paragraph 7B. The property is being sold as is. And if you have a seller that says, hey, I want you to put as is, you could just go, hey, look at paragraph 7B of the purchase agreement. It's already there. The buyer's already agreed to it. Isn't that great? Okay, so that's the condition of property. Questions about paragraph 7? Anybody? Okay. All right. Quick. You know what? I think we'll probably finish there, because we got seller in possession. That's going to take a little while, and we're about out of time. So we'll get into that next Thursday. Any questions before I let you guys go? Anybody have any questions?
No, but I learned a lot.
I hope so. I hope you guys are learning something. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll let you guys go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be productive, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.